They say calm people are born that way, unshaken, unbothered, untouched by the storm. But reality tells a quieter, more uncomfortable truth. Calmness is rarely innocence. It is often something learned, something earned, something survived. Because when chaos erupts, most react. Some freeze, others fall apart. Yet a few remain still, almost unsettlingly so. Why? What do they see that others don't? What have they felt that taught them silence instead of panic? This isn't about strength in the obvious sense. It's about something deeper, hidden beneath years of noise, pressure, and invisible battles. The kind no one talks about. There is always a moment, just before everything unravels, when the room shifts, voices rise, movements become sharper, breathing changes. Chaos does not arrive quietly. It spreads like cracks in glass. And in that moment, most people respond without thinking. Some rush to fix, some panic, some shut down completely. But then, there is someone who doesn't move. Not frozen, not indifferent, just still. Feels strange to witness, almost unnatural. While everything around them becomes louder, they become quieter. While others search for control, they seem to let go of it. And this creates a quiet question in the air. How are they not reacting? It's easy to assume strength, to label them as mentally strong or emotionally mature. But calmness, especially in chaos, often isn't what it looks like. Because what appears as control on the outside can sometimes be a deeply practiced response on the inside. Pattern, conditioning. Think about it. When someone stays calm while everything falls apart, are they truly unaffected, or have they simply learned that reacting changes nothing? There's a difference, and it's a difference most people don't notice. Some people don't raise their voice, not because they don't feel anger, but because somewhere in their past, raising it never helped. Some don't panic, not because they aren't afraid, but because fear has already been felt too many times to feel new. So instead of reacting, they observe. Instead of expressing, they contain. This kind of stillness doesn't come from nowhere. It has a history, and sometimes that history is quieter than the chaos itself. You see it in the way they pause before speaking, in the way their eyes don't search for reassurance, in the way their body doesn't mirror the tension around them. It's not resistance, it's familiarity, as if they've been here before, and maybe they have. But here's the part that often goes unnoticed. Calmness, in its earliest form, isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's simply the absence of reaction, because reaction once felt unsafe. So what looks like stability might actually be adaptation, a quiet adjustment to a world that once felt too loud. And the real question isn't just how they stay calm. It's why they had to learn it in the first place. Calmness in chaos rarely begins in peaceful places. It is not usually born in stability, comfort, or safety. It is shaped somewhere else, somewhere less visible. Often, it begins in environments where unpredictability was normal. A home where emotions changed without warning. A space where silence meant tension, not peace. Where voices could rise suddenly, or worse, where silence stretched too long, heavy and unspoken. In such places, reacting freely is not always safe. So something inside learns to adjust. Not consciously, not with intention, but slowly, quietly, like water shaping stone over time. The nervous system begins to study patterns. It learns to anticipate shifts. It becomes alert but not expressive, because expression at some point may have led to conflict, or dismissal, or being misunderstood. So instead of reacting outwardly, the reaction turns inward. And this is where the foundation is built. A child who once felt overwhelmed learns to stay quiet. The brain doesn't amplify the signal. It regulates it, not because the threat is smaller, but because it has seen something similar before. Repeated exposure to stress changes how the brain responds. Over time, the nervous system becomes less reactive to familiar chaos. It learns patterns, predicts outcomes, so instead of escalating, conserves energy. This is why some people appear calm, even in situations that overwhelm others. Their brain has learned that immediate reaction is not always useful. But there is another layer to this. Sometimes, calmness is not regulation. It is detachment, a subtle, almost invisible shift, where the mind distances itself from the intensity of the moment. Emotions don't disappear. They are simply delayed, pushed slightly out of reach. In these moments, a person may look composed, but internally, something has gone quiet in a different way. Not peaceful, just distant, like watching chaos through glass. This is not weakness. It is a protective response. The brain, when overwhelmed too often, finds ways to reduce the impact. It lowers the volume. It softens the edges. So instead of feeling everything at once, it feels just enough to function. And this can be mistaken for strength. But calmness in this form is not always about control. Sometimes it is about survival, because true control involves awareness, a conscious presence within the emotion, while conditioned calmness can exist without that awareness. And the difference between the two is almost invisible from the outside, which raises a deeper question. When someone remains calm in chaos, are they fully present in the moment, or have they quietly stepped away from it? Because the brain does not only learn how to react, it also learns how to protect. And sometimes protection looks exactly like peace. On the surface, calmness looks effortless. There are no raised voices, no visible cracks. The brain doesn't amplify the signal. It regulates it, not because the threat is smaller, but because it has seen something similar before. Repeated exposure to stress changes how the brain responds. Over time, the nervous system becomes less reactive to familiar chaos. It learns patterns, predicts outcomes, so instead of escalating, conserves energy. This is why some people appear calm, even in situations that overwhelm others. Their brain has learned that immediate reaction is not always useful. But there is another layer to this. Sometimes, calmness is not regulation. It is detachment, a subtle, almost invisible shift, where the mind distances itself from the intensity of the moment. Emotions don't disappear. They are simply delayed, pushed slightly out of reach. In these moments, a person may look composed, but internally, something has gone quiet in a different way. Not peaceful, just distant, like watching chaos through glass. This is not weakness. It is a protective response. The brain, when overwhelmed too often, finds ways to reduce the impact. It lowers the volume. It softens the edges. So instead of feeling everything at once, it feels just enough to function. And this can be mistaken for strength. But calmness in this form is not always about control. Sometimes it is about survival, because true control involves awareness, a conscious presence within the emotion, while conditioned calmness can exist without that awareness. And the difference between the two is almost invisible from the outside, which raises a deeper question. When someone remains calm in chaos, are they fully present in the moment, or have they quietly stepped away from it? Because the brain does not only learn how to react, it also learns how to protect. And sometimes protection looks exactly like peace. On the surface, calmness looks effortless. There are no raised voices, no visible cracks, no urgency in the way words are spoken or silence is held. But beneath that surface, something else is happening. Because staying calm does not mean nothing is felt. It often means everything is felt, just not expressed. Inside, there can be a quiet tension, not loud enough to be seen, but constant enough to be present, like a river flowing under frozen ground. You don't hear it, but it's there. This is the part that rarely gets noticed. When someone remains composed in chaos, they may be holding back reactions that were never allowed space before. Anger that learned to stay silent, fear that learned to stay hidden, confusion that learned not to ask questions. Over time, these emotions don't disappear. They simply change direction. Instead of moving outward, they move inward. And what you see as calmness can sometimes be containment, a careful, practiced containment, because expressing emotion at some point may have led to something unwanted, conflict, rejection, dismissal. So the mind adapts, says, feel it, but don't show it. And this creates a quiet divide within. One part observes the chaos calmly. Another part reacts silently internally. Two experiences happening at once. And this split can be exhausting. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that demands attention. But in a slow, steady way. Like carrying something invisible for too long. There's also a delay that comes with it. Sometimes the reaction doesn't appear in the moment. Comes later. In solitude. In quiet rooms. In moments when everything finally slows down. That's when the body catches up. That's when the emotions that were held back begin to surface. Not all at once, but enough to be felt. And this can be confusing, because the person who appeared calm earlier may now feel overwhelmed, with no visible reason in the present moment. But the reason isn't the present. It's the accumulation. Calmness in this form doesn't erase emotion, postpones it. And over time, postponed emotions can become heavier than immediate reactions ever were. So while the world sees composure, there may be an ongoing, silent negotiation within, between what is felt and what is allowed to be seen. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between true calm and quiet suppression. There comes a moment, quiet, almost unremarkable, when something begins to feel different. The same calmness that once felt natural starts to feel unfamiliar, not wrong, but questioned. It may happen after a conversation, or in the middle of silence, or during a moment when nothing is actually wrong. And yet, something feels off, because for the first time the calm is noticed, not just experienced, but observed, and that changes everything. Up until this point, the stillness was automatic, a response that happened without awareness. But now there is a pause within the pause, a subtle awareness that asks, is this really calm? Or is this something else? This question does not come loudly. It doesn't demand attention. It lingers, and once it appears, it doesn't fully disappear. Because awareness has a way of dissolving illusions. What once felt like control may begin to reveal itself as distance. What once felt like strength may begin to show traces of avoidance. Not intentionally, not consciously, but gently, like light exposing something that was always there. This is the moment where calmness becomes a choice. Not something that simply happens, but something that can be examined, felt, understood. Because when awareness enters, the separation between reaction and suppression becomes clearer. You begin to notice the difference between not reacting and not feeling, between being grounded and being disconnected. And this realization can be uncomfortable, because it asks something difficult: to feel what was once avoided, to acknowledge what was once contained, to sit with emotions that were previously postponed. And this is where resistance appears. The mind hesitates, prefers the familiar version of calmness, the one that protects, the one that keeps everything controlled and quiet. But awareness doesn't fully allow a return to unconscious patterns. Once something is seen, cannot be unseen. So the person stands at a subtle threshold between the calm they've always known and the calm they are beginning to understand. One is automatic, the other is intentional. One is built on adaptation, the other begins with awareness. And in this space, something new starts to form. Not a loss of calmness, but a transformation of it. From something that hides emotion to something that can hold it. Real calmness does not begin with silence. It begins with feeling. And for someone who has spent years staying composed, this can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Because reconnecting with emotion is not loud. It does not arrive like chaos. It arrives quietly, in small moments, in subtle shifts. A slight tightening in the chest that is finally noticed. A feeling of unease that is no longer ignored. a thought that lingers instead of being pushed away. These are not dramatic changes, but they are significant because for the first time, the calm is not replacing the emotion. It is sitting beside it. This is the difference between numbness and presence. Numbness avoids, presence allows, and learning this difference takes time, because the mind, having relied on suppression for so long, does not immediately trust openness. It expects discomfort. It anticipates overwhelm. So it resists, tries to return to what feels safe, that familiar stillness where nothing rises too close to the surface. But something has already shifted. Awareness has made it difficult to fully disconnect again. So instead of shutting emotions out completely, they begin to be felt slowly, in manageable ways. And this is where a new kind of calmness starts to form. Not the kind that removes emotion, but the kind that stays steady within it, like standing in a river, without being carried away by its current. The water is still there, it still moves, but it no longer controls the direction. This kind of calmness is not passive. It requires attention, a willingness to remain present even when discomfort appears, to notice emotions without immediately silencing them. And this can feel like vulnerability, because for a long time, calmness may have meant protection, a shield against unpredictability. But now it becomes something else. Not a shield, but a space where emotions can exist, without overwhelming the system. And in this space, something begins to soften. The tension that once lived beneath the surface starts to loosen. The delayed reactions begin to lose their intensity, because they are no longer being stored. They are being experienced in real time. And slowly, the internal divide begins to close. There is no longer a need to separate what is felt from what is shown, because both can exist together. And this is where calmness becomes real. Not quiet because it has to be, but steady because it understands. In the end, calmness was never about silence. It was never about becoming untouched, unmoved, or distant from the world. That version of calmness was only the beginning, a response, a protection, a way to survive something that once felt too overwhelming to face directly. But real calmness, the kind that feels different, the kind that stays, is something else entirely. It is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to remain present within it, to feel without rushing to escape, to experience without needing to control, like standing in the middle of a storm and realizing the storm does not define the ground beneath your feet. This kind of stillness is not rigid. It does not hold everything tightly in place. It allows movement. Emotions can rise. They can fall. And yet, something deeper remains steady, not because it resists the waves, but because it no longer fears them. There is a quiet honesty in this, no longer pretending to be unaffected, no longer needing to appear composed at all times, just present with what is. And in that presence, something softens. The tension between feeling and hiding begins to dissolve. There is no longer a split between the inner world and the outer one, because both are allowed to exist. And this is where calmness becomes something real, not a mask, not a habit, but a state of awareness, a groundedness that does not depend on the absence of chaos, because chaos will always exist, in the world, in people, sometimes even within. But calmness, in its truest form, is not about eliminating the storm. It is about no longer being lost inside it. And this understanding changes everything quietly. There is no sudden transformation, no dramatic shift, just a subtle knowing that you can feel deeply without being overwhelmed, that you can stay present without needing to disappear. And that stillness was never about silence. It was about coming back to yourself. If this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you recognized these patterns, then perhaps you've known this kind of calmness too. The kind that doesn't always feel peaceful. The kind that carries history within it. And if that's the case, there is nothing unusual about it. There is nothing broken in the way you adapted. in the way you learned to stay still when everything else felt unstable. Because that calmness served a purpose, protected, it endured. It helped you move through moments that were not easy to face. And even now, it is still a part of you. But you are not limited to only that version of calmness. There is space for something deeper, something softer, a calmness that does not require you to hide what you feel. If you'd like to stay connected to reflections like this, to explore the quieter, often unspoken parts of the human experience, this space will always be here for you. And if you feel comfortable, you can share your thoughts below. Not because you have to, but because sometimes your words may help someone else feel less alone in theirs. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness.